And it's really weird. There's this, and again, I don't want to get too far ahead, but while we're talking this cultural thing, we're going to see another theme that has to do with race, segregation, and even entertainment. So for example, white audiences will be entranced by wanting to hear African American style music. The only one problem is, whom do they not want to hear it from? Black people, you know, because we just can't stand black people playing their own music, you know. And so between clubs, it will say that if you're black, you have to come in from, like when we talk about the age of jazz, you have to come in the back door, perform, and then go out the back door, and you're not allowed to actually mingle with the audience or use the bathrooms or anything along those lines. Or in various cases where white performers will go to black jazz clubs to learn how to play, and then will end up performing for clubs because they're acceptable. And this will occur even with the playing on the radio. People will have a desire to hear this style of music, but they want to hear it from white people, even though you can't tell on the radio who it is. One of the classic stories was when we get to the 40s and 50s, there was a guy who was doing record imprints for African American artists. And he was nicknamed the Colonel. And he never sold a lot of records because he was doing mostly black singers. And so he decides that he has to find what he called, quote unquote, a white boy who could sing like a Negro. And again, I apologize, the phrases are offensive, but I try and always use the language of the time just to be clear. And so he's going to find this boy, you know, as he's calling him, one looking for him, and he finds a truck driver who amazingly can sing and has that gospel sound to him. And so he records him, and then he puts him on radio play. But he makes sure to do this. Before they play his music on the radio, they have him interviewed on the radio, and they would always ask a set of questions. And it always sounded very natural, but of course they're scripted, right, as to what they're going to be. And the first question they always asked this young white kid was, what high school did you go to? Well, of course, why did they ask that question? What high school did you go to?
See if it's illiterate or not.
Well, no, not that it's illiterate, but yes,
since they're segregated, they would know by
exactly. If they're segregated schools, you know exactly by him saying, "Oh, I went to such and such high school." It told listeners, by the way, I'm white. Okay, and so since I'm white, guess what? It's okay to listen to my music and enjoy it. And that young man, I know that his name may not be familiar to you all, but it is kind of important in the history of music. It was a young truck driver who became somewhat popular, a fellow by the name of Elvis Presley. And that's actually how Presley gets his start. So this, and in fact, what we're going to see is, as we talk about the late 19th century and entertainment, which is a further set, but just to give you an idea of how all this is going to be driven, that there's such a desire to see black performances, but not by black people. In vaudeville and elsewhere, there's this entire tradition where called the minstrel show, which is one of our most important entertainments for years. And what was the minstrel show? What was that? Does anybody know what that means? Yeah? Yeah. It's where white performers would dress up and put on what looked like almost like clown makeup, but it was black clown makeup. It was black face with the exaggerated lips, the giant surprised eyes, the Sambo figure look, and all this, and then would perform African American styles of music, but do it in blackface, and that was the vaudevillian style known as the minstrel show. At one time, the most popular style of entertainment in the late 19th century. Yes? That was the primary form of being able to, yes, to be able to do the face. But they also used various different types of white makeup as well to go around the eyes and then to exaggerate the lips and other stuff. It's grotesque. I mean, and all that. And in fact, some very famous, again, these are singers who wouldn't mean anything to you nowadays. But for example, one of the most famous of blackface performers was a fellow by the name of Al Jolson. Al Jolson, who sang a song called Mammy, which was originally from the African American community. That was his signature song, which he performed in blackface. He also became famous because Jolson was in the first talking picture known as The Jazz Singer, and performed in that. So it's a very interesting, the whole history of it's very, 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 very fascinating. But anyway, democratization of music. It actually allows people to hear and see and break down geographical and cultural barriers when it comes to sound, and therefore it's going to actually really see by the recording and broadcasting of sound, particularly by the radio era, we're going to see a lot of mixtures of musical styles. And even today, That's going to seem to be an important change we're going to see. The other thing that Edison developed with the aid of a fellow by the name of George Eastman was, if he did, of course, sound, guess what he also did? He did movies, moving pictures. Okay? And he was certainly not the first to create the first O-scope. There were lots of O-scopes before him. But again, the Edison movie machine becomes perhaps the most popularized. Eastman created the film. You'll later, of course, that name becomes more popular because he consolidates a company called Eastman Kodak. And so that might be a name. And of course, Kodak will become, in our minds, one of the largest filmmakers, although now ironically getting out of that business in many ways because, again, technology has changed and it's all going digital, and so filmmakers are no longer making film. Ironically, things are changing in that regards too. But the creation of movies is going to be a huge deal because one of the things that we export more than anything else is culture. The existence of movies is going to be a big deal. There are writers who have suggested, particularly those in the literary field, who talk about movies becoming, and movie theaters becoming sort of our modern temples. Because if you think about it, okay, if you go to a cathedral, what's the purpose of going like to a church? You know, that you have a very, particularly if you think of what we call high churches, like Catholicism and all this. The theater is vaulted, it has images of the saints, it's supposed to inspire awe and wonder. You go to the service, you have this emotional cathartic reaction, and you leave feeling emotionally, although sometimes very, lifted up and down due to the service, but by the end you feel this catharsis, right, and all that. Now compare that to going to a movie theater. If you go to the Edwards, just down here, down the street, what do you see when you go to the Edwards? What does it look like? The ceilings are vaulted and high. What painted with what? Images of actors, movie stars, the icons and images that are there. You go to your performance, you have your emotional experience, you leave with a catharsis. There was a period of time, of course, again, things are changing, but there's a period of time where people were more likely to go to movies on a Friday night than to church on a Sunday morning. And in fact, for many people, going to movies on a Friday night or Saturday night is almost ritualistic, right? Let's go to the movie. It's Friday night, right? And so now it's Friday night. What's on Netflix? But that sort of that ritual, that image, and so there have been papers written in the field of English literary criticism which talk about these parallels to these changes. But the export of culture is huge. And this is going to be part of, and we're going to talk about this in just a little bit, the export of the images of success in particular. But we actually, if you're not from the United States originally, where does one normally first get an image of what America is like? Where does one first understand what America and American values are supposed to be like? From our films and from our TVs and our music, right? Our music. So we all know that we're, baby hit me one more time, right? Or apparently, if you're listening to American rap, we're all gangsters, looking for a sweet ride and beating up our hoes, which is exciting, or apparently we all dress like Lady Gaga, and so we will, and we all want to have a bad romance, but this is actually, I cannot tell you or suggest to you to underestimate how much that we export culture, how much the images of American success in particular are huge. For example, in our TV shows, are any of the main characters in most of our mainstream TV shows ever really poor? No, they complain about money a lot, right? But what do they always have? They always have house and cars and TVs and VCRs and computers and Game Boys and all that sort of thing. They seem to be doing very well for all the venture they're doing, right? And actually, let's take one of the American comedies that was big, just real quickly. I don't watch a lot of this, so I apologize. I don't know a whole lot about it, but